So today we are talking about finding grace in providence. But what is providence? Well, here's some quick facts about providence. I looked up providence to find out what it was, and I found some information. So here we go. Providence is the capital of Rhode Island. It's the 37th largest city in America. It's known largely for its silverware and jewelry industry. It was ranked by Travel and Leisure in 2012 as the best food city in the U.S. So, if you want to find grace, pack your bags. Because it is exactly 3,065 miles from Shellridge Church to Providence. But actually, seriously, Providence, Rhode Island is a very important city in the history of the American Baptists. And not just the American Baptists, but all the Baptists in America. The first Baptist church in America, the oldest Baptist church in America, is in Providence, Rhode Island. And Roger Williams, who founded Providence and gave it that name, was also a Baptist. And he named it in honor of what he called God's merciful providence, which he believed was responsible for revealing this beautiful haven to him and his followers. And that's the kind of providence, that God's merciful providence, that we're going to talk about today. Will you pray with me? Dear God, may the words of my mouth, the meditation of our hearts, be acceptable to you, our God, our rock, and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. So I'm going to take you back before Roger Williams, back before even the time of Jesus, back, thousands of years to the time of Joshua. So imagine this. You are a member of the Hebrew people thousands of years ago. You've left Egypt and are now traveling to the Promised Land. And every day is the same. You wake up, you go out, and you collect manna. Now you're not quite sure what manna is exactly. All you know is it shows up every morning, it's tasty, it's nutritious, and this is an important point, it comes from God. It's a physical, touchable, palpable proof of God's providence. And every day is the same. You get up, you collect manna, you eat it, and you go back to bed. Every day. Until one day. That fateful day. You get up, you go out, there's no manna. You think to yourself, where's my manna? Has God abandoned me? Maybe my neighbors have some manna. So you go and check with your neighbors. They don't have any manna either. There's no manna anywhere. Where is our manna? Sequestration. Has God abandoned all of us? You think back to previous days. Perhaps you've done something to anger God or fall out of God's favor. What could it be? Well, you've just finished celebrating the Passover, this celebration of the glorious deliverance of your ancestors out of Egypt. You've eaten unleavened cakes to remind you of the food that the ancestors ate when they left Egypt. They had to get out so quickly, they didn't have time to wait for the bread to rise. And you also celebrated by eating the produce that you grew from the land. Could that be it? Was God angry that you helped yourself? Oh, how you long for some good old-fashioned manna. So that's the case of the story that Emrys read for us today from Joshua. It's kind of a strange text. It's just thrown in the middle, in between a story about circumcision and the Battle of Jericho. So I couldn't make this up. One day the manna, it just stopped. The people ate from the earth from that day on, it says. it makes one wonder, did anyone feel slighted by God? After all, they had this real, tangible, physical proof of God's providence and presence. And then it vanished. I would not be surprised if some of the Hebrews felt abandoned by God, felt a longing for God's care. And if the Hebrew Scriptures are any indication, this sense of longing, this sense of need, is very present throughout the history of the Hebrew people. You need to look no further than the Psalms. Psalm 63 that we read last week. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. Psalm 42 has this wonderful metaphor. As a deer longs for flowing streams, my soul longs for you, O God. The sense of longing is present in these Psalms. It's present in the prophets. And it carries all the way into the time of Jesus. Jesus tells this parable that Elise and I read this morning for a variety of reasons. But one of them is because he knows that his audience would identify with this younger brother. So this younger brother, like the Hebrews that were blessed with manna, this younger brother was also very blessed. Never wanted for anything. But he was curious. He wanted to see what life was like outside his farm. So he left. He wanted to live life to the fullest. Rich food, strong drink. But pretty soon, the reliance on himself lost its luster. Once the money was gone, the great life went with it. The rich food, eaten. Gone. Strong drink, eaten, drank, rather, and gone. Friends, gone. He finds himself in the lowest of the low, feeding pigs, unclean, sacrilegious pigs. And he's hungry, and he's tired. He longs for the time when he was awash in providence. Like the Hebrews longing to have back their manna, he longs for the time when he was in his Father's care. And this longing is the only thing that fills his belly. He just wants to go home. I understand this journey. As a fresh-faced 18-year-old, I felt the call of the big city. I moved from my very nice, modest house in San Jose to the Big Apple, New York City, sight unseen, by myself. Though I didn't have the same kind of agenda as the brother did in this story, I was young and naive. And I was foolish enough to think I could just make this jump on my own, and I didn't need anyone. And like this brother, this younger brother, I found out that I was wrong. Now, I did end up in squalor feeding pigs. I want to be that clear about that. But I identified with this sense of longing. It wasn't that I didn't like living in New York, because I did. And it wasn't that I just felt homesick, although I did that as well. No, this longing, it was much deeper. See, back in California, I had a church family and a good support system. I had religious practices, and I felt a closeness with my God. And in New York, just didn't have that. I didn't belong to a church. I didn't really have any spiritual disciplines that I practiced. And I missed it. I missed this closeness that I felt with God. I missed feeling the blessing of God's providence, that God was caring for me and protecting me and was present. metaphor from earlier, I missed the manna. So, one Sunday morning, I left my apartment and I took a walk. Now, I intended to walk down 20 blocks to a church that I knew, and I made it 1.5 blocks. And I came across Madison Avenue Baptist Church, which many of you know I've spoken about. Because from the moment I sat down at that church, I knew that I was home. They welcomed me with open arms, with genuine kindness, and with joy and laughter. I belonged. I was home. The brother in our story today had a similar experience. As he sat there in the mud with the pigs, feeling as low as a human can feel, he remembered his father's workers. His father's workers fared better than he was doing right at that moment. Maybe he could go back and he could convince his father to make him a worker. Maybe he could just get a tiny portion of what he once knew. So he gets up and he leaves. And as we all know, the father runs out to meet him. He hikes up his robe even so that he can run faster. And when he gets to the younger brother, he throws his arms around him in a loving embrace. He welcomes him gladly. The brother is home. So at this point, we might question, why is Jesus telling this parable? What does his audience have to gain by hearing it? Well, remember, this is the same crowd that has heard this story about the manna. This is the same crowd that has sang these psalms of longing for God. Not to mention the fact that they have been overcome by the Romans. They're defeated. They're occupied. And they long for God's presence with them, for God's protection, for God's care. In a word, they long for God's providence. And Jesus is telling them that God's providence, it's there. And it has always been there. All they need to do is look for it. And it's not just present, it's abundant. The parable says that the father held a giant feast, killed the fatted calf, dressed him in robes and gave him a ring, made him part of the family again. So what does this parable mean for us here today? Well, are we so different from this audience of Jesus? Have you ever wanted to feel the presence and providence of God? Have you ever strayed from home spiritually? Got lost? Wondered if God was still there? Have you ever felt that sense of longing that is present in all of these stories? Have you ever looked to the sky and wondered, where is my manna? Well, the good news of this message today is that it's not too late. That God's presence, God's care, God's providence is available to us. It's always available, and it's abundant. Like the father in the story, God waits for us with open arms, ready and welcoming. Picture it like this. We are like trapeze artists, swinging back and forth, dangling upside down with our arms out, wondering where to go next. Dangling back and forth and back and forth. And if we'd only look up, we'd see that God has been swinging in front of us the whole time, arms outstretched, just ready for us to grab on. We only need to reach out, offer our hand, and God is willing to take it and to bring us home. And the people said,